Okay, so we're kind of shifting gears this morning in our study of zeal. And we've been going through the process for making a fire and comparing that to the process for building zeal biblically. And I say we're shifting gears because we're coming to the third step in the process, which is fuel. If you're going to build a fire, you need to prepare the area. We discussed preparation. You need to ignite the flame. We talked about that last week. And then you need fuel. And we've been covering one step per week. But now that we've come to fuel, there's so much to talk about here. We're going to pause for a while and discuss it. And what we mean by fuel is in that definition of zeal that we shared the very first week. When we talked about zeal, we said, generally speaking, zeal is enthusiasm, excitement, passion. But biblically, it's more than that. Biblically speaking, it is serving God with wisdom, love, courage, energy, and diligence. And we got these terms from various biblical passages on what zeal is. We saw that zeal is not just enthusiasm, but it's this service with these 5 elements. And we're going to look at these as the fuel for zeal, for biblical zeal. So, at least the next 5 weeks, we'll be doing that. Oh, by the way, next Sunday is a 5th Sunday. So we're going to have a guest with us. Ron Harper is going to be here with us. Ron is a very good speaker. He has been here for several years. He has come and spoken for us. And so he'll be here with us and share 3 lessons. The morning services are the usual time. Then we'll have lunch, and then we'll have a 12:30 service. So don't forget that, and invite people. It's going to be a great day together. We'll take a break in our class, of course, because of that. And then we will return to our study of zeal in 2 weeks. And so we'll get back into this fuel then. So the first item you see on that list of ways we serve God is wisdom. So we're talking about wisdom this morning. Now, in order to think about wisdom as part of the fuel, let's go to our metaphor of fire. And I want to ask this question: how does fuel guide fire? We often think about fuel providing the energy for the fire, the chemical reaction in the fire. You can't have it without fuel. But how does it guide a fire? How does it shape a fire? If you're using wood or gasoline, how does that define the fire? Have you ever thought about that before? I know that sometimes people, when they're lighting a bonfire, they'll douse the brush with fuel, and then they'll maybe make a line with gasoline from the brush to a point a safe distance away, strike the match, drop it on that line, and it'll act like a fuse. And the fire will travel that line that is created by the gasoline, and then it'll get to the bonfire and explode in flames. What are you doing there? You're shaping the fire with the fuel. Whenever you build a fire in your fireplace, you stack the wood up where you want the fire to burn. You don't put wood in the living room, on the rug, on the carpet. You keep it in a safe place, and that's how you control the fire. Whenever you are building a campfire, you might get all the flammable substances away from the center of the fire, and you might pile up the wood there because you want it to burn in a particular place. You don't want to catch the whole campground on fire or the woods on fire. So fuel guides and shapes a fire. And that's the role that wisdom plays in zeal. Wisdom is a guide. Wisdom is limiting. It shapes the fire. It's very important for your zeal to take a shape and not just be raw energy. Because when you have zeal but no wisdom, bad things happen. Here's a verse that shows that. Paul is talking in Romans 10 to, or about, a group of people who were Christians and they were full of zeal, but they were doing a lot of harm because they were demanding that Gentile people and Jewish people also follow the Jewish law, and they were requiring that for salvation. One word that scholars use for this group of people are the Judaizing teachers. You can call them whatever you like, but they were adding something to the new covenant that wasn't there, a requirement to live by the Jewish customs and follow Christ. And so Paul speaks to these people who are doing so much damage in the kingdom, and he said, I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. They're excited, they're enthusiastic, they are zealous, but their zeal has not taken the shape it should take. It doesn't look the way zeal should look in the kingdom of God. So fuel shapes your zeal, and wisdom shapes your zeal, is what I meant to say. How many of you have heard of the Zealots? Capital Z. Who is the most famous zealot in history? What was his name? You know it. Well, maybe you don't know. It's not Paul. One of the apostles, though, Simon the Zealot. You've heard of Simon, right? Simon the Zealot. Now, Paul was a zealot, lowercase z, because he was persecuting Christians. I think that's what you're talking about, Saul of Tarsus. That's true. That's true. He was a terrorist, and he was a zealot for the Jewish way of life. Simon, what was his zeal for? There were sects of the Jews, divisions. You've heard of the Pharisees. You've heard of the Sadducees. Well, there's another sect of the Jews called the Zealots. And they carried a sickle-shaped dagger. And they were very good at causing disturbances and violence. There were terrorists of the first century in favor of the Jews against the Romans. So while Paul was fighting for the Jews against the Christians, Simon, in his life before Christ, was carrying a sword to fight Rome on behalf of the Jews. You have to understand that when Jesus came into the world, the Jews had only been under Roman rule for just a few years. Less than 100 years, I think. Before that, they had been an independent nation. Now, they had not held on to that very long, but they had been an independent nation, and then Rome came in, took over, and so for about 60, 70 years, they've been under Roman rule. There were people living who remembered what it was like to have a Jewish king. So these zealots were still holding out hope that they could regain independence in Jerusalem. And they were killing Roman soldiers, killing Roman officials, vowing to fight to the death. They had this name Zealot after zeal, a biblical quality we're trying to develop in here. But we're not using Simon the Zealot's former lifestyle before Christ as an example, because when he began to follow Christ, he dropped those vicious, violent ways and became a man of peace who was fighting a spiritual battle instead of a physical battle. And it all has to do with wisdom. So let's talk about what wisdom is. What is wisdom? You need three things to have wisdom. Number one, you need information. And we all know that we need to make a distinction between wisdom and knowledge, right? Knowledge is facts. Wisdom is being able to apply the facts. But you do need the facts. So it starts with information. But it's not just the information, right? So you also need experience. In other words, you need to have opportunities to apply what you've learned to life. And that's where wisdom pulls away from raw data or information. You put the information into action. It's a lot different when you take the knowledge and you apply it. When it's all theoretical, there's no resistance. But anytime you apply truth, somebody's going to push back on that. When you make a stand for something that's right, there's going to be enemies out there, critics in opposition to you. And then you see if you really believe the information. That's when it gets real. So you need experience. And the third element related to the experience is time. Because wisdom develops not after the first experience, but after several. So I get information on how to cook something, how to bake a cake. And I have the recipe before me. I don't have wisdom in baking just yet. I got to try to bake a cake. I baked the first cake, and it's lopsided, and the icing looks terrible. I put the icing on when the cake was still hot, and it's kind of slid off, and it tastes a little funny. It's not fully baked all the way in. Okay, am I a wise baker? No. I need to try again and again and again, and maybe after my 12th or 13th cake, I might start to be able to claim wisdom, but it takes time. So these three elements are absolutely essential to the development of wisdom: information, experience, and time. Getting more specific, I think we need to understand the Bible's wisdom is very useful in living life. Proverbs is full of wisdom. And if you lived by the Proverbs, your life would be better. And here's why. There's two realities that wisdom takes into account. The first reality is an ultimate reality, and that is how the world works. The ultimate reality is there is an order to the world. There are laws that govern the world that we live in. Objective truth is real. There are philosophers who say there's no such thing as objective truth. And there are a lot of people who live as if there's no such thing as objective truth. And they'll tell Christians, you can't point to the Bible and say, this is right for everyone, because truth and reality varies from person to person, culture to culture, situation to situation, time to time. But there is a proper order to the world. And we argue against that in matters of religion and philosophy, but when it gets down to when it gets down to other things, we accept that there's objective truth and order in the world. When you go to the doctor and you have tests run, and you ask the question, what is the diagnosis? Are you happy with him if he says, well, it could be a malignant cancer, or it might be nothing at all? What did the test say? Well, the tests say it's cancer, but there's really no such thing as objective truth. Are you very comfortable with that kind of diagnosis? Of course not. You believe the tests say it's cancer, you believe the test, because you believe there's an order to the world, and science is discovering this order little by little. It's discovering how the body works and how the material world works. It experiments on it, and we can learn certain things. Physically, we understand that. We understand that socially. What happens if you use and manipulate people? If people are just transactional to you, and you look at them as just on earth for my benefit, I use them up and kick them out. What's going to happen to you socially? You're not going to have any friends. Your family's going to turn their back on you. You're going to have relationship problems, right? Because that's not the way you treat people. People don't like that. Psychologically, if you suffer trauma as a child, you're going to struggle with anxiety when you grow up. And you're going to have to learn coping mechanisms. And you might sit down with a counselor or psychologist to learn how to deal with that. And they will use what they've learned about the proper order in the world to help you do that. What I'm saying is, science can discover things about the material world. Psychologists can understand things about the order of the mind. Sociologists, counselors can understand things about the order of social relationships. And the Bible reveals the proper order of the spiritual realm. It gives us the ultimate reality. There's a proper order to the world. But then there is a present reality that wisdom also teaches us to apply. And the present reality is the world is not the way God created it, but because of sin, it is broken and fallen. So even when you apply wisdom, things may still go wrong. Bad things happen to good people. But it's not because there's no order in the world. It's because the world is broken. When we brought sin into the world, God said to Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you." Sin has brought problems into the world. So wisdom teaches us how things are generally true. And if you live a certain way, you'll be living aligned with reality. But it also teaches us to be ready for things to go wrong. And not to lose our minds and give up on God and say, there's no meaning or purpose in the world, because there's a reason why things go wrong, even for people who are doing what is right. And that is that sin has brought a fallen nature to the world. So wisdom applies those two things. I think that's enough on what wisdom is. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Maybe there's a way that you've looked at wisdom that might help us here as we think about how it should shape our zeal and provide a framework. Anything?
I like to say that there's worldly wisdom and then there's godly wisdom. And
Yes.
we should constantly try to seek to use godly wisdom in everything in our lives.
That's absolutely right. Jackie said there's worldly wisdom and godly wisdom, and we need to pay close attention what kind of wisdom we're trying to apply, and it's godly wisdom. And that's exactly where I'm going to go in a moment in the book of James. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good segue. No, you did good. You're helping me here. So now that we know what wisdom is generally, let's make notice of this, that there are different kinds of wisdom, and we need to be careful concerning which wisdom we have. Going back to Romans 10, verse 2, those people that had a zeal but not according to knowledge, their zeal operated by a kind of wisdom, a worldly wisdom. They'd been fed things all their lives, and that was fueling their zeal. But the zeal had the wrong shape because it had the wrong fuel. All right, so let's go to James. Because James distinguishes the worldly wisdom from the godly wisdom. But before he does that, he makes a promise to us. And so I want you to read this promise and take it very seriously from James chapter 1, verse 5. He says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. Ask and you shall receive." How does God answer that prayer? I'm not sure I understand it, but I believe it. I believe that in His mysterious way, He grants wisdom to those who ask. Now, He goes on to say, don't ask with doubt, ask in faith. The one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed. He says he's a double-minded man. Don't let that man think that he'll receive anything from the Lord. But if you ask in faith for wisdom, it will be granted to you. As we try to bring zeal into our lives and passion, let's not forget prayer. Without the prayer, you don't have the wisdom. Without the wisdom, the zeal can't take the shape that God wants it to take, because fuel shapes a fire. And with that in mind, turn to chapter 3. and let's take a look at the kind of wisdom we need in our lives to have the proper zeal. And we're going to be looking in detail at verses 13 through 18. And so let's start with this question. What kind of wisdom was James referring to? And he starts out saying this, verse 13, "Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom." Let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. What he's saying is, if you have true wisdom, it's going to bear fruit in your life. Now, this is something James capitalizes on over and over again. James is all about, if you are this, then this will show in your life. And he's saying, if you are wise, then there are certain works that will accompany your wisdom. The world will be able to see it. That's why a lot of people give the name practical Christianity to the book of James. He's all about how faith is useful in life and how it bears fruit. A couple other examples that are familiar to you. With regard to faith, look at chapter 2, verse 14. "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him?" So like with wisdom, there are different kinds of wisdom. He's saying there are different kinds of faith. And he says in verse 17, faith by itself, if it doesn't have works, is dead. Is he not saying the same thing about faith here that he's saying about wisdom? That the faith that saves is going to bear fruit in your life, and there are going to be works accompanying it. Don't claim you have faith and then live as if you don't. And then with the tongue in chapter 3, he returns to this idea. He asks in verses 11 and 12, "Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water." This incongruency between what you claim is in your heart and what's really coming out of your mouth is betraying your sinfulness. That's what he's saying. You say you're a Christian and then you use your tongue to curse people. The fruit that's coming out of your mouth is showing what's really in your heart. And so he gets to wisdom in verse 13, and he's saying, who is wise? He's saying, I don't want to hear your claims. I don't want to hear your boasting. Let's look at your life. Let's look at how you live and the choices that you make and your relationships and your service. And I won't have to hear you make claims. I'll know whether you have wisdom or not. So it's proven wisdom that he's looking for. Now, with that said, let's go back to Jackie's point. There's a godly wisdom and a worldly wisdom. So he gets into the subject of false wisdom in verses 14 and following. Let's read those verses. "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice." So first of all, notice from verse 15, the origin of false wisdom. He says 4 things about it. It's not the wisdom that comes down from above. We assume he's talking about heaven where God is. So it's not coming from God. He says it's first, what? Earthly. And earthly is used in a moral sense here as in terms of the kind of wisdom you could develop if you had no consciousness of the spirit realm. If you were like an animal and you lived as if this world is all there is. That's a kind of a wisdom, but it's earthly. It's also unspiritual. Some translations have natural. It's basically the opposite of spiritual. And it's much like earthly. Demonic, very much a companion to the idea, it does not come from above. It comes from below, or hell, from Satan. So this wisdom that is false, does not come from above, is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. That's the origin. Now, James is telling us, learn to distinguish one wisdom from another. Now, let's get into the characteristics of this false wisdom. What does it look like? Remember, he's all about the fruit of the wisdom. He says, first of all, if you have bitter jealousy, it's a false wisdom. Do you struggle with jealousy? Jealousy is wanting something someone else has to the point that it creates negative feelings. Jealousy is self-serving, it's bitter, it's selfish, and it makes a person miserable. There is a jealousy of God that's different because it's right. God should be the highest one. He should, to him goes all the glory, but none of us can claim that. When we make life all about me, we're not exhibiting the wisdom from above. Secondly, selfish ambition. Selfish ambition is very much like jealousy. It's the condition of the heart of someone who will stop at nothing to get what he wants. Even if there's collateral damage that hurts loved ones, even if there's sin involved, the end justifies the means. That's selfish ambition, not caring about the other people in your life. He says it involves boasting. Do not boast. Worldly wisdom is very insecure. It doesn't believe in God. It doesn't rely on Him or trust in Him in any way. It's very insecure, and insecure people have to tell others how great they are because they don't think people can see any value in them at all. The more a person boasts, as a general rule, the more they boast, the less they think of themselves. If you know in your heart that you're smart, you don't have to tell people you're smart all the time. If you're really tall, you have to go to people and say, hey, did you know I'm 6'4"? They can see that. You don't have to tell them that. So what does it mean when somebody's saying, I am righteous, I am holy, I am good, look at what I did? It means you know in your heart that you are not those things. Or at the very least, you don't trust God to reward you for those things. And you believe you got to get the rewards from others, and they're not taking notice. You're not getting the pat on the back, so you've got to tell them, and then they'll give you your due. That's not godly wisdom. And then he says last that it is false to the truth. This gets back to what we're talking about, the ultimate reality and the present reality. It doesn't live in the confines of truth. It lives by its own rules. And it doesn't shape life according to the way God made the world, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, physically even. That's the wisdom that is from below, from the world. And what are the results of it? Look at verse 16. He says, here are the results of worldly wisdom. Where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, remember that's the fruit of worldly wisdom. Where that exists, there will be disorder and every vile practice. Disorder is not the way of God. What does Paul say in 1 Corinthians 14? God is not the author of confusion. Let everything be done decently and in order. Disorder is a life in disarray, chaos. There's no predictability to it. There's no rhyme or reason, we might say, to the choices one makes. That's a life out of control. That comes from this earthly demonic wisdom. And he says, also every vile practice. What does the word vile mean? Evil, corrupt, nasty. And I haven't found an English translation that brings this out, but the word translated vile here, that in other translations is evil, also has the idea of something that is cheap and gaudy, that is really worthless. And so the practices that come from worldly, earthly wisdom are meaningless. They're vile because they're shallow and cheap. Do you want that kind of wisdom in your life? I don't think any of us need it. You don't have to work hard to get it. You just, because it's earthly, you just exist on this earth and you'll start exhibiting selfishness and jealousy, and you don't have to read your Bible to get this. You can learn it from the way the world operates around you, and you can be like everybody else. But I think that what we're looking for is the wisdom that will shape a zeal for God. And so we go to true wisdom in verses 17 and 18. Let's look at that. James 3, 17 and 18. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Remember, James is all about practical things. He's saying, I will tell you if you're wise by looking at your works. Are you jealous and selfish and boastful? Do you not live according to the truth? Well, then that is going to be an earthly demonic wisdom. But then in verses 17 and 18 he says, here's what I should see in your life if you are applying the wisdom of God. Let's break it down quickly and look at each of these items. First of all, he says it's what? Pure. It is first pure. A lot of times these lists are in no particular order, but you can tell that James means to list purity first. You've got to get that in place before the other things follow. So it's first pure. That means unmixed. The word here would apply in the marketplace to honey that hasn't been diluted in any way, or wine that hasn't been diluted. It would be, the merchants would be using this word to try to make a sale or justify a high price. There were so many diluted products on the marketplace in those days that people were really wary of buying certain items, and they would demand a sample or something because merchants were cheating people out of the real thing. So he's saying the wisdom is first pure wisdom. Maybe he would use the word innocent. It is not mixed with sinful motives. There's no selfish ambition in this wisdom. No vile practices. And he says it's first pure, then peaceable. Why do you think he puts purity ahead of peace? What will happen if you are peaceful first and then pure? What might you do to attain peace? Does the Bible ask for peace at any price? No. There are some times when peace just can't happen. I think a great parallel passage to this idea is Romans 12:18. Romans 12:18 says, if it be possible, live peaceably with all men. Is it possible to live peaceably with every person in your life? Are there people that you just have to agree to disagree with? Are there people that you just aren't able to associate with because it's toxic for you? Yeah, unfortunately, there are people that you just can't have a good relationship with. Forgiveness, I've heard it said, takes one person, but reconciliation, bringing two people back together in a relationship, that takes two people. Both parties have to be willing to have that relationship for it to occur. So it's first pure, then it's peaceable, then it's gentle. Gentle has been translated courteous, considerate. You get the idea. It's using forbearance in your relationships, being willing to forgive wrongs that are committed against you. You're not always looking for a fight. You're not aggressive and abrasive toward others. You're gentle. Next, open to reason. Some translations just say reasonable. You listen to other people. You don't think you have all the answers. Wisdom is always growing, and you can't grow if your mind is closed. Are you the kind of person that says it's my way or the highway? I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. If you're that kind of person, you don't have wisdom in your life. James says, you can claim it, but I'm seeing the fruit of your life. It is full of mercy. That is giving people what they don't deserve. Maybe they deserve your wrath, but you give them your love. Maybe they deserve vengeance, but you give them forgiveness. Full of good fruits. Those are good deeds, acts of service. It is impartial, treats everyone fairly and sincere. That's kind of where we started with purity. Purity and sincerity, very closely related. So you can see James has kind of bookended this. And all those things in between, if they're not guided by purity and sincerity, could lead you astray. But wisdom is always using purity as its compass. And so let's take open to reason, for example. You have this idea that's based on the Word of God, and somebody confronts you, says, no, that's not right. My way is right. I want you to listen to me. This thing in the Bible, times have changed, and you need to realize that the Bible's outdated, and it's old, and it's out of fashion. And what's good and true and honest these days is this new way, whatever it is, fill in the blank. Well, that's when purity needs to govern your reasonableness. And you say, I'm willing to listen to people until they start contradicting what I know is true in the Word of God. And then purity outranks the reasonableness, or it informs the reasonableness, and the reasonable thing to do is to listen to God instead of listening to that human philosophy. You see what I mean? So the impartiality, the good fruits, the mercy, all of that is governed by purity and sincerity. That's why he put that in that order. It's first pure, then it's all these other things. Wisdom will produce this kind of lifestyle. And what we need to do is look at this and ask, James makes it easy for us. Am I pure? Are my acts peaceable? Am I a peacemaker? Am I gentle? Am I open to reason? And so on. And if you're not, then you don't possess the wisdom of the world. There's no debate over it. If you're full of bitter jealousy and selfish ambition and boasting, and your life is not according to the truth, that's worldly wisdom. And the wisdom is important to your zeal because it gives it shape. It defines your zeal. And your passion will be channeled in the right direction. This is the first part of the fuel. After you've prepared for zeal to enter your life, and you've allowed God to strike the fire, and the flame is lit, now we need to put fuel on, and the first part of that fuel is wisdom. All right, that's all our time for this morning. Appreciate your attention.